Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would sit down and do another video for you guys and gals. Let me get a sip of my water first. My radio voice going, and let's talk about this. All right, on this topic of training frequency and why once a week frequency per muscle is probably okay. Again, this is one of these where I had to eat crow, right? Because I'm one of the people who was telling all of you a decade ago, we need to train a muscle group twice a week, maybe 3 times a week for novices, but twice a week. And I cited all those studies on muscle protein synthesis to the point where even when clients realize, hey, you're doing once a week, but I'm like, but I've done it also, and I've done it in client vlogs up to 2 years ago. And I think that's a point people lost sight of. I was doing that 2 years ago in client vlogs. I have personally chose to maintain twice a week on training frequency up until very recently. And we need to discuss the evidence behind this, because this is not something that I came to lightly, to where it's like, oh, Blaha just decided for no reason at all that it was okay. I had to go off of the overwhelming bulk of the scientific and real world evidence, which basically showed that there probably isn't a difference, okay? So in terms of muscle hypertrophy, the reason we thought it was, and it was myself, it was a lot of other evidence type based people, and this is one reason you saw the upper lower splits push so much, because you don't want people training 6 days a week. It's probably not ideal. 5 is pushing it, and with 5 you better kind of know what you're doing. So we were saying, because we had all these studies, not all these studies, the limited studies that had been done looking at muscle protein synthesis, and they were determining that after you train a muscle, you only get up to 48 hours of muscle protein synthesis. So what does that mean? Well, that means you only have 48 hours to grow. And on top of that, a lot of us were saying, it wasn't just me, it was a lot of other people, we were kind of saying, well, that means that we need to be careful on volume per session, because if muscle damage gets too high and we're not recovered within that 48 hours, guess what? Maybe we'll lose muscle growth. I personally said that. That was a reasonable assumption based upon the available data 10 years ago. And it sounds good, but that's the problem when it comes to data. We can have some data and go, well, it sounds good, and then we can draw reasonable extrapolations until we test those extrapolations repeatedly in the lab. Okay, here's the problem that always was problematic. It's like, well, what about all these people who do once a week body part splits who made tons of gains? Can we say, oh, it's because they were all on drugs? That's what a lot of us said. Well, it's extending the muscle protein synthesis time. See the problem? Because it wasn't everyone who was on drugs. There were plenty of drug-free people who got fantastic gains training this way, thousands and thousands of them. So, but we all always wrote it off, and myself included. Again, I'm guilty of this. And I make no excuses for it other than went off the data that we had at the time. But again, the issue, it's worked out okay in the real world. Well, and then the further it's been tested, what is it that we found? That as long as volume is equal, it doesn't seem to matter. All the volume equated research and studies kind of found, look, if you're going to do whatever, 12 sets a week, 8 sets a week, you can do it once, you can do it once, you can split it up 2, you can split it up 3 times. No significant difference in the hypertrophy outcomes. Well, that's kind of an important point. Then the biggest issue is that it's been demonstrated multiple times. The frequency doesn't really matter that much, as long as the volume is equal. So it makes sense if a person wants to run crazy high volumes. Sure, you want to split. You don't want to do 20 sets for a muscle in one workout. That data is generally shown in the past. That's kind of bad. But what about people who are going to do 10 or 12 sets? I mean, isn't that kind of what you see me doing? 10 to 12 really hard sets, close to failure using progressive overload. And we can choose whatever frequency we want. That's what the evidence shows. That is the actual evidence says, hey, we can split that up however we want. The hypertrophy is going to be largely equal. However, the issue we run into is the other one that I pointed out, that when we do stuff inside of a session, neurological fatigue accumulates. The muscles that you work last in a session, if you're doing multiple muscles, tend to grow the least. Now that's problematic. So it kind of means, all right, we might do okay if we're training everything multiple times a week, but we're going to develop muscle imbalances more easily. Now, this is what experts and scientists are saying. Use me as an example in the real world with all the strength training. I always started with the big movements. Accordingly, I always did arms, and if I did anything like side delts or any delt work, where did I put it? The very end of the workout. What are my most developed muscles in my body? Well, my posterior chain, my back, even my chest. Right, I got a pretty good sized chest. The arms didn't grow enough. Years and years of doing that. Am I not evidence of what this has been saying? And I have to accept that. So then that means that someone like me is going to have to rebalance that out. It means I need an actual arm day now. So I'm not saying everyone needs an arm day. Even if you do a split routine, you only need an arm day if your arms are probably lagging. Otherwise, you can throw triceps in on chest day. You can have back day and do them. The muscles that have grown the biggest on me largely have been really my torso. So I do those on their same day together. They don't need as much specialization. So with split routines, it lets you specialize a little more. You can combine stuff together that doesn't need as much work. You can make sure that every muscle gets worked at the start of every workout. The other thing to think about with why the frequency matters less, and maybe this is a big factor, isn't there overlap? And it may be enough to respark the muscle protein synthesis to keep you growing off the ulcer. Isn't that something I've often said? Well, this will respark muscle protein synthesis. Even if you come in and you only do a few sets, for the second workout, it should respark it. Wouldn't that hold true for secondary muscles? In other words, if you do some close grip bench pressing on your arm day for your chest, for your triceps, isn't that going to work your chest again? Obviously, you're getting some muscle protein synthesis on the arms from the chest and the back. All you're pulling, you're telling me pull-ups, particularly chin-ups, but pull-ups aren't going to stimulate some bicep. To me, bench press isn't going to stimulate some tricep in the lab. They grow pretty decent from it. See where we're going with this? How about if shoulders have their own day? What all other muscles get hit with shoulders? And shoulders get hit again on all those days. What happens if you split your legs into different days? Like I have, a hamstring and a quad dominant day. Isn't there overlap? Don't deadlifts work quads? Yes. Is it enough to cause some muscle protein synthesis increase again? Probably. Does all the squat pattern movements work hamstrings? It's enough to maybe cause that. It's a secondary muscle. Very much. They do grow a little bit in the lab from squats. How about glutes? They're getting work both days. How about all the back work involved in these different things? See where we're going? They're not really only being worked once a week. They're only directly being focused on once a week. But it works. And as much as a lot of us wanted to say, well, it doesn't work that well. It doesn't work perfectly. It may not work. Yeah, people have got results in the real world doing it. Phenomenal results, both on and off gear. And if we're going to stand here and say that there is drug-specific training, or are we simply going to say that drugs give you more wiggle room? I think it's the latter. But if your training isn't good, you're still not going to get amazing results, even on gear. People forget that's the genetically gifted people on gear. They have a much larger wiggle room. So that is why my opinions change. And I still program all of those. I still have some rank early novices in rebuilding who are hitting full body 3 times a week. They're rare. I have one. I have people who do upper lowers. I have people who do body part splits. A bunch of my athletes do push-pull legs 3 times a week. The thing is, I use all of these tools based upon the individual needs, individual programming of the client. And isn't that what all of us should be doing with our own training, with our clients? That's logical, that's rational. Different frequency is just a tool in the toolbox. That's it. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.